So this is the scrotum that I'm touching with my finger, right? The skin-like sac that holds the testes inside of it. And you can see one testis or testicle inside of the scrotum on this model. So you can't see seminiferous tubules, straight tubules, reedy testes here. You can see this structure, which is the epididymis, sitting on the superior border or edge of the testicle. The epididymis is connected to the vas deferens, so it's kind of hard to see, but there is a pale tan colored tube running up in this direction. It goes over into the male's pelvis. You can see it running along the top of the bladder here, and then to the back side of the bladder. That entire thing from here all the way to here is the vas deferens or ductus deferens. Because it's hard to see along this portion of it, if I tag it on this model, I'll tag it approximately here, where you can see it kind of standing by its own on top of the bladder. But I do want you to understand it goes all the way from the epididymis to the back side of the bladder. If I wrap the structure that I'm holding between my index finger and thumb with a piece of tape, I'm looking for the term spermatic cord. For lecture, you should know that the spermatic cord has arteries, veins, nerves, lymphatic vessels, the vas deferens, and the cremaster muscle found inside of it. So the whole thing wrapped with tape is the spermatic cord. But if I turn it over, you can see they have a, I'm going to call it brown and white striped layer. That is supposed to be the cremaster muscle. So kind of in the normal orientation, this whole thing wrapped with tape, I'm looking for spermatic cord. But if I flip it over and ask for the specific brown and white layer, I'm looking for the cremaster muscle, which is one of the 6 things that you find in the spermatic cord. On the back of the bladder, you also have your seminal vesicles. This is one of 2 seminal vesicles that are on the back of the male bladder. Just to show you, this will come later. This is from the other model that I have up here. If we take the pelvic organs from the other model and hold them sideways, you can see something similar here. Here's the white vas deferens, or part of it at least. Here's a seminal vesicle. But if I turn this bladder to the back, you can see 2 seminal vesicles and 2 vas deferens coming from each side. On this model, we can only see 1 vas deferens and 1 seminal vesicle. This structure inferior to the bladder is the prostate gland. Just for review, this is the urinary bladder on this model. If I take that top piece off, these are for review. Inside the bladder, there are folds called rugae. You also have a smooth triangular area called the trigone that we talked about in the urinary lab and lecture. You can see the prostate gland cut in a sagittal section from this view. There's 2 tubes that run through it. The vertical tube connected to the bladder is called the prostatic urethra. The tube running through the prostate gland at more of an angle, that is the ejaculatory duct. You can only see one of the 2 ejaculatory ducts here. Again, this is the prostatic urethra. The next part of the male urethra is called the membranous urethra. It passes through a thin sheet of muscle that I'm pinching between my fingers. That sheet of muscle is called the urogenital diaphragm. So although you can't see the membranous urethra, I could tag the urogenital diaphragm and ask you to name the specific tube-like structure that passes through it. That would be the membranous urethra. Once the membranous urethra passes through the urogenital diaphragm, it is called the penile urethra for the rest of its length. We can't see the penile urethra until I can remove the top part of the penis. You can see part of the penile urethra here. It can also be called the spongy urethra. And the opening at the tip is called the external urethral orifice. You can see the main 3 columns of erectile tissue that make the majority of the penis. there is the corpus spongiosum. That's the column of erectile tissue that surrounds the penile or spongy urethra. So here's the penile or spongy urethra. On either side of it, there are two sort of darker pieces of tissue. That is the corpus spongiosum. And if you follow the corpus spongiosum to the distal end, you can see it's enlarged. The enlarged part of the corpus spongiosum is given a special name. It's called the glans penis. There are two columns of erectile tissue called the corpora cavernosa. There's a couple different ways you can see one of them cut on this model. This would be touching the outside of one of the corpora cavernosa. This would be one of the corpora cavernosa cut in a sagittal section. And this surface here that I'm touching with the tip of the pointer, that would be one of the two corpora cavernosa cut in a cross section. This here, this surface here, or any of this would all have the same answer. Those are all examples of corpora cavernosa. The final thing on this model, when we did the digestive lecture, I told you about cul-de-sacs, and I told you when we get to the reproductive, male and female pelvises have different cul-de-sacs, and they're given more specific names. So, unfortunately on this model, this piece of the large intestine is physically stuck to the bladder, and it would not be in real life. So if I were able to put the tip of the pointer between the large intestine and the bladder there, you'll notice that the tip of my pointer is now in a space between the rectum and the bladder. That space is called the rectovesical pouch. There is no way for me to get a tag to hover in that space. So if I'm going to tag the rectovesical pouch, it will touch both the rectum and the bladder. The same tag will touch both. And the question card will say, name the space the tag is sitting in. If I want to tag the bladder, I could tag here, it would say name this structure. If I want to tag the rectum, I can tag it here, it would say name this structure. But a tag in this area that says name the space, that would be called the rectovesical pouch. It is one of the cul-de-sacs that we talked about in the digestive lecture. Any questions on the male pelvis?